There's a lot of confusion around what is flexibility, what is mobility, and there's definitely differences, but there's nuances, right? So if we think about flexibility, think about this is passive. There's no active muscle contraction. And essentially, what you're going to do, I'll kind of paint a picture with an example. So if I was going to test your flexibility of, say, your hamstrings, I would have you lying down on the ground and I would say, I want you to relax as much as possible. Don't contract any muscles. I'm actually going to grab your leg and bring it upward, close to your chest, in that classic hamstring flexibility test. And you're not doing any muscle contraction. You're not doing anything. So that's flexibility. We're seeing how long your tissues, in this case, your muscles, your fascia, your tendons, can elongate or stretch. And so active mobility has an active component to it. So it's similar. We're still testing, how far you can move a joint, how far you can move your muscles, tendons, fascia, etc. But in this case, you're going to be contracting your muscles to do so. And so in that same scenario, you'd be lying on the ground. This time, I wouldn't actually physically move your leg for you. I would actually instruct you to contract your hip flexor muscles to bring your leg up. And that's basically, I'm testing to see what your active mobility is, how much you can actually use your own muscles to move your hip joint. And so that's really the big difference between flexibility and mobility, is that active component to it and the muscle contraction. And it's really what separates, even static stretching from passive stretching, or AKA static stretching, from active stretching.
Yeah, that's a really good visual. I think you kind of gave the entire audience. I'm sure everybody has either seen that or had that done. I mean, it's, you walk into any, box gym these days, you'll see, half a dozen trainers with their clients either laying on a bench or laying on the floor, walking them through that exact stretch. Now, they're always doing it from the flexibility side of things, where it's the trainer is kind of assisting them. I guess a question kind of comes in my mind. Okay, if we're testing with both of these things, how similar is the range of motion? I mean, should we be able to, I guess, actively through mobility get our leg close to where we can get it with the assistance of somebody pushing it?
Yeah, you should. You see differences though. So like if, in that scenario where you were testing someone's flexibility versus their mobility, you might get further passively, again, testing their flexibility versus their active range of motion. And that tells me that you have the flexibility in your actual tissues, right? They can they can stretch out passively, but then when you try to fire those muscles using your brain and your nervous system, and obviously the muscles that are creating that movement, there's some disconnect there. And we see that far too often. And really, a lot of people get wrapped around like, I want to improve my flexibility. And so I'm going to, again, a lot of people are static stretching. We'll kind of dive into that, but improving flexibility is really not enough, and it's actually, it can do you harm. There's a thing called being hyper mobile. And that's when you're just super flexible, right? You can put your joints into these weird positions. Maybe you can even do a splits kind of naturally. But you don't have the control of the muscles around the joint, AKA you don't have proper or optimal joint stability. And so if you're super flexible, but you don't have that active mobility and that active stability, your joints are essentially sloppy, right? And they can kind of, you can't control them. And so an example of that would be, say you have really good hip flexibility. Again, say you can do the splits, just naturally, whatever. Some people can do it without even trying, but you don't have, again, that good active control of your hip muscles, all the hip muscles, the front, the hip flexors, the gluteus medius on the side, the glute max on the back, the inside adductor muscles, really a 360-degree around your hip. You don't have good control. And then say you go for a run, you're just even walking, you're playing a sport, or really doing anything in life that involves movement. You're not able to control your hip enough. Well, what happens is that hip's kind of sloppy, right? And then all of a sudden, it puts your knee in a compensated position. So your knee compensates then for your sloppy hip. And I'm just using sloppy as kind of a generic term. And so over time, that knee is basically just kind of twisting, and it's compensating for the lack of stability at your hip. And that's a huge contributor to knee pain, just using this specific example, because your knee's constantly being put in positions, and it's that those compensations then lead to joint wear and tear, and that joint wear and tear then eventually does typically lead to pain and injury due to joint breakdown.